Good evening. Good evening. For David's talk, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Christian Samsarian, and I'm the chair of Interaction Design, and I'm here to welcome you all in this second in our spring series of Bald White Men Talk About Design. So David Sherwin was here a couple weeks ago, and what it's really about is what we hope the impact of specifically interaction design is and will be. So there's should be some good feelings. We're trying to create a good aura around interaction design and the optimism that we have, we want to share. So I'm going to give the talk on April 4th, so maybe put that in your calendar. And I have the pleasure of making, it is hard to make a short introduction for Haakon because he is such an amazing character. I have the pleasure for the second time to work with him because in the 2000s, sometime around 2004-ish, we worked together at IDEO, and we were both in the software experience practice. And Haakon was phenomenal. Like, I knew no one who could design faster. And you wouldn't think of faster as a good thing, but he actually did amazing stuff really fast. And one thing that I was always struck by with Haakon is the rest of the team could be in some kind of process in embroilment, and Haakon would just be sitting there sketching. And he'd just go, well, what about this? What about this? And all of a sudden, it would reorient the team back around what we were trying to do, which was design great things. And I was just so impressed. He was just kind of the engine of making things happen. And he still is. So he went off for a while. He went to Europe and got a PhD in robotics. In kind of crazy robotics. And every so often he tries to convince me that machines are sentient and that their purpose is for us, is to make them exist. And then he went to CMU where he was teaching for a few years, and yeah, call out for CMU. And we were somehow able to lure him back to the Bay Area, where we are really proud to have him here at CCA, and he's made such a difference. He's teaching a real phenomenal class right now called Selfless Design, where they're just doing really great stuff, and you might get a little taste of what that is tonight. And he's been doing the intro class, and he's been leading the internship program, and just really doing what he did at IDEO, which is amplifying what everybody else is doing. So with that, just really proud and pleased to introduce Haakon Faste.
Okay. Thank you, Christian. That was very nice. And it's wonderful to be here. It's really nice to see so many friendly faces in the audience. Okay, so I guess I'd like to start out my talk by saying hello. As I said, no, it's really a pleasure to be here. I'm so thrilled at CCA, and I'm happy that, that you could all make it out tonight. So tonight I want to talk about a bunch of different things. I thought I would start by showing you this picture of the Earth. So this is the Earth. This is the planet that we live on. And it's a really particularly special place. We're there right now. Here we are, in it. And I think it's actually kind of remarkable that we don't spend so much time thinking about the fact that we're living in it. Or at least not certainly from this perspective, right? Thinking about it kind of holistically, and just being aware of our experience in it. But clearly, it's very important to us, because frankly, the Earth provides everything that we value, and everything that we care about, and everything that matters very deeply in our lives. Here's a closer view. So this is a significant piece of North America at night. And I just think it's really beautiful. Here we can see the effects of electrical power distribution as it kind of spreads across the west, and we can see us here on the left side. And it shows how we live in a transforming world and how technology is making the world increasingly interconnected and also increasingly activated. But I think it also hints at some of the complexities and the challenges that lie ahead as we enter this networked technology landscape. It's clear from this that technology is very important to us. It enables us to illuminate our cities, and to communicate and to travel, And it enables us, frankly, to be right here, right now, watching this image on the screen as I talk to you through this microphone. And because technology is so important to us, and because it enables us to do so many things in our lives, we've developed a lot of methodologies for channeling our collective efforts to shape it, and to make sure that it's robust, and that it's well-engineered, and that it meets our needs. And among the most important of those efforts are advances in the field that we know of as design, right? Which is really what I'd like to talk to you about tonight. So here at CCA, we talk about different aspects of design, or different design disciplines, right? So we have industrial design and graphic design, interior design, architecture, fashion design, and interaction design. But really, I guess from my perspective, all of them are interaction design, because all of them shape our behavior and how we interact with each other when we walk into a building, or we talk on the phone, or we look at a sign or a piece of packaging, right? We're interacting with things as we go through our life. So this photograph shows San Francisco International Airport at night. And these are the traces of departing planes as they take off. So it's a very long exposure image. And I think it shows how we build infrastructures to support the things that are important to us. And those infrastructures that we build tremendously influence how we behave. Right? Clearly, you can actually see some of the tail fins of the planes here at the bottom as they turn onto the runway and take off. And how that once they're in the air, they follow a similar trajectory, but then they branch out and go where they need to. So these infrastructures that we make tremendously influence our behavior, whether it's how we talk on the telephone, or meet friends, or decide where to eat dinner, or where to go, or how to get there, and so on. And tonight, what I really want to emphasize is just the important role that design plays in influencing what we consider to be important to us. Right? What are our values? And how can technology shape what our values are? So for one thing, I think it's really important to note that pretty much everything in the world, everything that we interact with, apart from nature, is designed, right? Everything is designed. And given that, I think there's a growing awareness about the importance of design in general in our society. And I suppose that's probably why we're here tonight right now, because we value design, and we thought this would be enlightening in some way. And I think our society increasingly understands that when we design things poorly, it dramatically influences our ability to improve ourselves, to be happy, to connect with each other, and to survive and to flourish, and so on. And I'm particularly interested in how technology changes how we feel about the world. Right? So this is an image from Stanley Kubrick's film 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I think it greatly changed how we think about emerging technologies, like artificial intelligence, and really how we feel about technology. And in a lot of ways, people who are working on science fiction projects like this are really designing something for our values to push against. Right? They're saying, do we want to live in this world that we can imagine or not? So it's really about how we feel about life. And I think now, 30 years after this film, frankly, the technologies we interact with on a daily basis are increasingly intelligent. So we talk with them, right? We have Siri, we have smartphones in our pocket, right? And they interact with us as a partner. And I think this vision helped to shape those values to some degree, to point out some of the fears and to help us overcome them. There are two main ideas, or really claims, that I'd like to advance tonight. And the first is that the world is how it is, or at least, I guess, our experience of the world is how it is, directly as a result of the things that we value. So this is the Large Hadron Collider at CERN in Switzerland. It's a nuclear particle accelerator. And by looking at it, we can ask the question, do we value things like nuclear particle accelerators? And the answer is yes, we must, because we build them. And why do we value them? Well, we value them because of our values. So our world is the result of the things that we value, put quite simply. We value technology and science and innovation, and that value creates demand, right? So we invest in these values, and by having a set of values, we create our world. And by investing in a set of values, we shape the values of others. So Apple has done a wonderful job of investing in design, and now lots of people value design because they value the experiences and the products they have when they interact with those devices. But if our world is the result of the things that we value, and we value some things more, and other things less, then there are some very important things that may go unnoticed, or ignored, or marginalized, or forgotten altogether. And perhaps these are difficult things. They might be things that make us uncomfortable, or that challenge us in some way. But the point is that our world is a result of those choices that we make, right? And as a consequence, it's critical that we examine our values if we're going to design a better world. So tonight I'd like to introduce this idea of value-driven design. And by this, I really mean two things. The first is that design is the process of shaping our values. And the second is simply that our world is how it is because of those values. Or to say it another way, if pretty much everything that we care about is designed by humans, then the way we design things is extremely important, right? Our values really matter. So let's start by thinking about what is value. Now, clearly, the study of values has a really deep history in philosophy and economics and the social scientists. And I'm not a philosopher or an economist. But we know things like Plato discussed moral and ethical values and concepts like truth and beauty. And he distinguished between intrinsic values and instrumental values. And there's a lot of recent theories on value. And most of them are coming from the social sciences, right? Thinking about how we can quantify and measure value in our lives in business or so forth. So I'm not really going to get into that. But I do think some really basic definitions would be useful. So the first definition of value is the regard that something is held to deserve, the importance, worth, or usefulness of a thing. And in this light, value is a way of objectively measuring things. So it sounds kind of silly to say it this way, but the things that we value are the things that have value, right? Or we value things because they have value. This definition of value refers to the value that something has, right? A thing possesses that value, and we can measure that. Okay. And then the second definition refers to how we feel about things subjectively. So it deals with a person's principles or standards of behavior, or one's judgment of what is important in life. It's about me, myself, as a person, valuing something. I value my family, and I value my friends, and I appreciate the weather in California. These are all things that I value. So the first definition is about the value that something has, and the second is about the values that I have. Given this, why don't we call the first kind of value social value? Okay? It's the regard that something is held to deserve by society, or the importance or worth or usefulness of it. So I wanted to give you a few examples of what this might look like when we think about social value. So one example is what we could call value as savings, right? Or value as efficiency. So this McDonald's extra value meal has extra value, right? Not only you get to choose between these delicious options, and it comes with a medium fries and a medium drink. Okay, so this is of value to us because it gives us so much, but it costs so little, right? So I would consider this to be what I'd call an efficiency value, right? Because the process of creating something has been streamlined to increase the value while diminishing the cost. And this allows us to put our valuable resources, or our money, into something else. And of course, it comes with certain consequences to our health or to the environment. Okay. Another example of social value is value as quality. Okay? So this Rolex watch is extremely expensive. And we consider it to be something of value because it's expensive to make, and it's expensive to make well. Right? So value here has something to do with the relationship between quality and cost. Right? And this is clearly related to efficiency value because, well, we might perceive something to be high quality simply because it's expensive. That might also be an inefficient way to tell time, right? And we might be able to tell time more efficiently with higher quality in some other way. In any case, we could say that there's a spectrum somewhere between efficiency and quality that highlights the way we measure value, right? And in this conception, we could think of value as a certain kind of currency, right? It's something that we can measure in a system. A third example is what we could call value as innovation. And this is often the narrative that's used when describing what designers do. right? So designers deliver value by leveraging new technologies to make the world better in some way, right? Here, most of you probably know by now with their very prevalent advertising about the Nest thermostat. So this is a smart home thermostat. It's very beautifully designed. And they have innovated what it means to have a thermostat. And it's much friendlier than your traditional thermostat. And it's much smarter. So it learns your patterns of behavior over time, and it regulates the temperature of your house accordingly. And that allows you to save on your power bill. And we find that valuable in part because the innovation has delivered a very high quality, efficient thing, which is personal in some way, right? It connects to us at another level of value. It's something that we deeply value, this idea of innovation. Okay, so to summarize, there's this idea of social value, right? And social value is the result of design. In this conception, design creates value, right? It's the narrative we tell ourselves about why design matters in terms of business and research, and scientific endeavor, and the impact that design has, and so on. And this is one of the reasons why we value design. Okay? And as I mentioned, the way that we measure this kind of value is as a sort of currency. So how much quality or innovation or efficiency does a given product or service deliver to us? So, well, on one hand, this has something to do with economic, or we could say fiscal value. Really, it's more about social status, right? When we design something to be valuable, presuming we design it well, our society values it. Okay, let's go back to our definition. So the first kind we called social value. Let's take a look at the second kind of value. A person's principles or standards of behavior, one's judgment of what is important in life. Okay, so this definition is really about what we could call subjective value. And it has everything to do with the values that I hold personally as an individual and the value judgments that I make as I navigate through my life. So we usually talk about subjective value in the plural sense, as values, right? Because usually this is a spectrum of values that I hold. It's not, I don't have just a single value. I have a whole set of values, and oftentimes they're in conflict with each other. And it's about the conflicts between values that result in the judgments people make as they wrestle with these challenges and decisions as they go through their life. This is critical for design as well, because clearly designers have value and they bring those values with them to their work. So one example of a subjective value would be something like truth or honesty, right? We might value honesty more than dishonesty because we perceive lying as something that isn't fair. Or at the very least, we don't like to lie because it makes us uncomfortable. So we try to be honest whenever possible. So this is what we could call a value principle, right? I have the principle that truth is good. Yeah. Here's another example of subjective value. This one is value as judgment. So here, for those of you who took an art history course, you might remember Marcel Duchamp's famous ready-made fountain sculpture in 1917, which was basically a ready-made urinal that he signed and submitted to an exhibition. Okay? And the question that confronted the art critics almost 100 years ago when he did this was, is this art, right? And if this is art, is it good art, right? How do we value this thing? And it's a really difficult question to answer because ultimately our personal values are so subjective and they're informed by our cultural values. And this requires making a feeling-based value judgment, right? Often these judgments and decisions are aesthetic and intuitive. They're very subjective. Okay? And really, everything we do in life requires making these kinds of judgments, right? And this requires making a decision to value one thing more than another, which is really hard to do. So if, for example, I was looking for a new car, and if I cared about the environment, do I want a Toyota Prius, or do I want a Chevy Volt? One is hybrid, one is electric. And this is hard, because there's lots of trade-offs between them, right? And the trade-offs include things like, if I'm living in a time where nobody's concerned about the environment and there's ample supplies of oil, we don't think about it, and we value the one that consumes lots of oil. And if I care about domestic-made vehicles, I might instead value the Chevy, right? Because it's something that comes from here. Okay. So to use our early example, we could talk about other kinds of value principles, right? So if I have the principle that honesty is good, I make judgments about what is honest and what is dishonest, and the results shape my behavior profoundly. Another issue with subjective values is just that they're highly dependent on context, right? So it might really matter where in the world I am, or when it is that someone was lying to me, Maybe it was a joke, maybe it was serious, maybe it really affected my life in some way. Okay, and then as a final example of subjective value, let's just consider some of the values that are common in design and design education, because I think they illustrate how subjective values are embedded in our culture. So as designers, we value things like having appropriate resources and materials, and rapid prototyping, and a freedom to make a mess and explore things as part of our process. Right? We like to get dirty and explore. We value practice-based learning, right? And the fluency and the flexibility to use different tools, right, at the appropriate time. We value certain skills, right, like critical thinking, and an openness to diverse perspectives, and confidence with new technologies, and other human skills like intuition and empathy, and our values. And we value having fun, and role-playing, and synthesis, and visual thinking, and post-it notes, and staying up late in the laboratory all night long, and balancing prototypes on our head, and so on. And I think the reason we value these things is because we know from experience, as designers, that the aesthetic qualities and value judgments and design principles that we follow have a direct influence on the quality of the designs we create. So in short, if we wanted to make a more human world, or to humanize technology, it makes sense to deeply value the methods and approaches that we know work best. Okay, so to summarize, based on our definition of value, subjective values drive design. Okay? They're the source of our judgments and decision-making throughout the design process. And they're the principles we rely on to guide our practice as we work. And this is really very different from our previous example, because we know from that definition of what I called social value that the world is the result of the things that we value. Okay, or put another way, we could simply say that values design value, or the things that we care about or care less about shape the world. And this raises what I think is a really simple but very important thought, that if our values are the basis of the value we create, how might we shape our values? By designing them to improve the values we hold and the world that results. If design creates value, is that value valuable? Or looking at it another way, it's also possible to perhaps design an economy of values, right? A new way of measuring value that puts its emphasis on human values instead of on financial values. So we could design an altruistic value engine, right? Or value-driven innovation that's going to improve the world in some positive way. Okay, so to answer this question of whether it's possible to design such a system, and as part of this ongoing research project that I've been working on for the past 2 years, I've been performing a bunch of experiments with the help of many of my students and colleagues, and some of you are here, to see how we might go about this value-driven design concept. So I want to tell you a little bit about some of that work exploring value-driven systems. And here's an experiment we did. So one of the first things that we did as we started thinking about this was to spend some time thinking about the kinds of things that people might value. So this is a sampling of values. And we made a list of possible values, and we drew on current events and research into philanthropic causes and our personal experiences and talking to our friends and family and seeing the things that they valued. And I think the essential thing here to notice is that we weren't too terribly concerned about whether this represented an accurate cross-section of society's values. We just wanted it to reflect a range of very diverse kinds of values so that we could start to study values and how people treat them and think about them. And then we chose some images that seemed to go with them. And without a doubt, many of those decisions were probably based on kind of, you could say kind of cliches around what those values might mean, right? So for climate change, we have a polar bear on an iceberg. And you'll see that some of these are very big and kind of abstract ideas. There's sort of a whole range of values, right? So something like capitalism or children, right? It's like, what about children, right? It kind of depends, right? It depends on who you are. And some are very specific. And some seem negative. So nuclear proliferation, pollution, right? And others seem maybe more positive, like technology or medical research or wellness. A whole range of values. And what we did is we printed these values as a deck of cards. And we did some qualitative experiments just talking to people about how they felt about these values. We did these studies in a few different ways. So the first time through, I was working with 2 students at Carnegie Mellon, and we did a pilot study where we interviewed a variety of people, both students and kind of philanthropists at the university, one-on-one, and we asked them to sort the cards according to a set of criteria and just kind of talk aloud about why they were making the judgments they were about these particular values, to talk out loud. And since then, I've been using these cards in my classes as a way to investigate value-driven design with my students. Some of the things that we asked people about included, kind of broadly, what do they care about? And what are their priorities? And we asked people in particular to sort the cards according to these 4 criteria. This was my class, I think, just a week ago today. And we were playing with the value cards in class and kind of discussing values and their role in design. So the first of these criteria that we looked at was just people's passion for the values on the cards. Right? So I also printed out these little pieces of paper that you could use to help sort things into groups. Do I care a lot about this, or I care less about this? Okay? Am I passionate about it? The second was about our priorities. So this is a priority for the world, or this can wait till later. And then action. I actively do things about this thing, right, in some kind of positive way, in some way that I care. Or I don't do so terribly much about it. And then the last one was knowledge. I know a lot about this, and I need to learn more about it. OK, so doing card sorting exercises like this is nice, because it lets people reflect out loud while they're thinking through the various trade-offs and value judgments. And in this case, we had 40 cards, and I've now done this experiment many times with many people. So I'm just going to kind of summarize some broad observations from these various studies. OK, first off, we found that what people care about, right? I care about this a lot, or I could care less about this. Their passions. We found that their passions are highly variable. So a lot of this has to do with the situation and goals of the people you talk to, clearly. When I was at Carnegie Mellon, I had more people who liked the things on the right. And when I was at CCA, I had more people who liked the things on the left. And it's just a value judgment, right? Here we're at an art college, there we're at a kind of technical school. And people had a pretty clear idea about what they cared about. They tended to align with the cards that were fairly specific, right? Like art or science. Or specific cards like children, right? I have children, I know I like children. Or I know I don't like children. Right? But it's important to note that the aim of the exercise wasn't to determine which values people thought were more important than others, but really just to understand how what we value shapes the thought process and decisions we make about what we do. The values themselves are really less interesting than what we do with them. Okay? When I asked people about priorities, there was actually a lot of consensus. Most people do a pretty good job of getting to a place kind of like this. Okay? So we know that there's climate change, resource depletion, nuclear. Yeah, these are things that are bad. And we know that we face lots of big problems, and it's relatively easy to identify what they are. These tend to be fairly consistent, right? They're big, difficult, wicked problems with no really clear solution. And I think one really interesting observation from this experiment was that while it's easy to identify values that everyone in a given culture agrees on, it's actually much harder to say what isn't a priority. Because in truth, I was handing people a deck of cards with values on them, and everybody looked at them and were like, yeah, these are all important. But then we say, oh, but now you have to choose some of these as more important than others. Then it becomes more challenging. And that's particularly true if you don't have a well-developed sense of which values really matter to you personally, right? Because you might not have a lot of experience with those particular subjects. One of the most interesting things that we found was that when we asked people about action, right, what do you actually do? What things do you do that you actually care about? We noticed that there was almost no overlap with those things that most people said were the most important in the world. Okay? Now, this is almost certainly a factor of who you talk to, right? Because we talk with a lot of students, and students are kind of in a learning mode, and right now they're focusing on their education. And I'm sure that if you went and talked with a nuclear physicist, they would highly value nuclear physics. And if you went and talked to a climate scientist, they would highly value climate change. But in general, we found that people tend to do things that they care about only if the outcomes or benefits of that are within their immediate control, right? like wellness or nutrition or fitness. Right? I feel like I can do these things. I know that I value them. When I do them, I immediately feel better because I eat better, I feel better. My doing leads to a certain sense of caring. So one person we spoke to, this was a student at Carnegie Mellon, he said, "It can be hard sometimes because my job is not all stuff I care about. I struggle to find time to do the stuff that I care about deeply." And he went on to say that he was really looking forward to doing his thesis because that was a place where he would be able to explore some of the things that he cared about, but noted that that was also a kind of privileged situation, a safe space for caring about these things. Okay? So I think we have this sort of tension that exists when we think about values, and particularly things that we do, right? There's a tension between what I value and the tension between what others value. And oftentimes we have parents who might want us to do one thing, or, you know, he needs to get a job. Oh, but he's really interested in something that doesn't make money, right? Okay, with regard to knowledge, this was one of the places where we saw one of the stronger correlations between the two categories. Okay? So people tend to know a lot about the things that they actively do stuff about. And this makes sense, right? When we do things, we learn about it. This is what we call learning by doing. And it's why in an art school like this, we really value practice-based education, because we think there's a lot of tacit, craft-based knowledge that you learn when you do things, right? And this is particularly true for children. If you had a very hard childhood or something dramatic happened to you, or you empathize closely with someone who was hurt in some way, you might be more interested later in your life in devoting your life to that cause, for example, because it's something that you're drawing on deeply as part of your experience. So really, as a consequence of knowing a lot about something, people are more capable of actively pursuing it, or at the very least choosing not to pursue it, which is also a certain kind of action, right? So the things I actively do stuff about tend to be things I know about, and if I know about things, I can make informed choices about what to do. Okay. As a result, a lot of people who've had these personal learning experiences tend to take those learnings with them, and they care a lot about them. So we saw this with a variety of social causes, right? Diverse areas where it's possible for people to do things kind of on the local scale that might make a big impact, right? Based on some kind of personal experience that touched them in some way, right? So maybe I knew someone who had cancer, or maybe I was discriminated against. And those are areas where I can make a big social impact drawing on my values. And while many of these are also bigger problems that the world has, they also impact us personally. And it's also possible to make a change at the individual level, right? So these issues are all actionable in some way. They're social issues, but I can get into them and do something about them. Whereas maybe, you know, some other broader climate change is much harder to kind of get your hands on, right? They're actionable. So basically we see this sort of loop, right? If I know something, then I care about it. If I care about it, then I do it. If I do it, then I know about it. And there's this positive reinforcement that happens. Okay. But this same pattern also explains why global priorities that are well agreed upon don't get that much action, even if we know about them. Because basically there aren't any clear pathways to action. So while I might know that the climate is changing, it's hard to do much about it by myself. And so I don't know what to do to make a change. So one person we spoke to said, I don't need to learn more about asteroid impacts because I know it's important, but it's out of my control. Okay? All right. So I might not know what to do about something, right? And as a consequence, I have no experience with it. And so I need to learn more about it. Oh, I need to learn more about it, but that's not a high priority because I'm not doing anything about it. So these tend to be things that can wait. So we have this kind of interesting causation, right? Where things that are a priority for the world, I don't do much about, and as a consequence, they're no longer really a priority for the world, right? Even though we think that they are. Okay. Also, I think it's important to note that efforts to influence these important global priorities might also be perceived as somewhat utopian and maybe a little bit dreamy. And I want to be taken seriously by my peers. So I might not do something about them. So as a consequence, I haven't done any learning by doing. And so I might need to learn about it, or I might just be in denial, right? And as a consequence, it doesn't really become a priority in my life. And this kind of cycle or challenge or block continues. Okay. So I think what we take away from this is that if I want to make an impact on the world, I need to have some kind of personal knowledge about what to do. Also, just because you know about something doesn't necessarily mean that you know about it rigorously, with a whole lot of depth, right? So we all know about these things: capitalism, technology. But there are also these really broad general categories, right? So because knowing requires a certain amount of depth, and if you want to make an impact, you somehow need an actionable plan about what to do to get there, right? To make it better. So we could say that, it might be helpful to have some kind of scientific knowledge about how to get there, right? But it's only if that scientific knowledge is actually really useful or actionable that it's truly important. So I know a lot of research scientists who consider, oh, well, there's nothing more important than research. And the conclusion of all my research is that we need more research on the thing that I'm valuing, right? But I don't think that it's really a matter of, if we would like to stop climate change, we need necessarily to study climate change more. Is that we need to take the knowledge that we have, right? We know the Earth is getting hotter, and we need to do something about it, right? We need more action and maybe less knowledge. We invest a lot in knowledge, and we presume that someday that knowledge is going to help us. I'm not sure that's necessarily the case. OK, so broadly speaking, there's this kind of sequence of causality that we saw, right? That connects our values as designers with the value that we're able to create in the world. Okay? So we could say that our passions, or the things that we care about, tend to lead to the things that we actively do things about, right? And if I do things about something, I'll tend to know a lot about it. I'll have some knowledge. And the hope is that having that knowledge, I will have a clear sense of what my priorities are in the world. Okay? Or broadly, the idea here is, like I said before, that values design value. The things that designers care about deeply shape the actions they take, and their ability to reflect on those actions and to efficiently innovate to kind of positively impact the quality of the world in some way. But in this chain, we can also see some other factors emerging that begin to explain why we're not always able to deliver the kind of value that we ultimately want. There's a little bit of nuance here, right? Because of the ways in which the things we care about influence what we do, and the ways in which social values are often in conflict with the things that we know and value deep down inside. And so given all of this, what I'd like to do is kind of take a deeper and a little bit more actionable look at some of the insights into value-driven systems that we drew from going even deeper. OK, so I'm going to build this kind of conceptual model for you. And as a designer, I like to do that using Post-it notes. Okay, so let's start with action, right? Or what we actually do. So clearly throughout our life, we face value judgments on courses of possible action, right? So imagine for a moment that you're facing one of those decisions. You could choose. Should I actively do something about it? If this is something I care about. Or alternatively, maybe I should refrain from acting and do nothing about it at all. And truly, for the sake of this discussion, it doesn't really matter if we consider it as a choice. Let's just say we either do it or we don't, okay? So let's say we do the thing. OK, so we're going to do something. Great. Well, we know that by actively doing something, I'm going to learn about it. I'm learning how to do that thing, or at least I'm learning what it's like to be doing that thing. I might not like it, but I am learning about it. And that knowledge is shaping my values, shapes how I feel about it. And now I'm becoming more aware of my interests. OK. Now, if I'm aware of my interests, then essentially I become aware of where my passions lie. And this empowers me to make a more informed decision about what to do. And doing something, am I doing something that I'm really passionate about, is the question. Or am I doing something that I feel I ought to do for some reason, not because I'm passionate about it, but because there's some kind of pressure to do so? It could be an external pressure, like peer pressure or pressure from parents or a spouse, or cultural norms saying that I shouldn't do something. Or it could be an internal pressure, some other kind of psychological pressure that I put on myself that prevents me from doing the things that I love. So clearly this gets very complicated, because we often have these emotional, passionate things that we care about, and we want to do impulsive stuff, but then there's another kind of rational part of our mind that doesn't want to mess up the status quo. Right? So there's always this kind of tension between security and growth, right? And how willing am I to take a risk on this thing? In any case, all that really matters, I think, for our understanding of value-driven design is that I'm passionate about something or not, and that passion has an influence on what I do. My passion is an indication that there's something here that I value. And that creates this positive feedback loop that we were talking about before, right? I do things, and then through doing them I learn, and because I know about them I care about them, and because I care about them I'm empowered to do more about them. Okay, now let's think about what happens if I don't do something that I care about. Okay, so we're going to go back to the middle and kind of off to the left. Okay, well, if I don't do anything about it, then it's a certain kind of inaction, right? And this deprives me of a valuable experience of some kind about what I could have been doing. So, of course, I don't learn much about whatever that thing is, right? I need to learn about it. Okay. In other words, it leads me to something that we could call ignorance. I'm not aware of it. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. And I don't mean to imply that ignorance is necessarily a bad thing. But if I'm not doing something I care about, then I'm not learning about it, so I'm less knowledgeable about it. I'm less informed. Okay, and this kind of lack of personal contact that I might have means I have less time available to care about it. First of all, because I've spent less time doing it. But I think more importantly, I've spent less time thinking about it. And as a consequence, I have less time available to value that thing. Right? And this comes back to the idea of value as a kind of currency, right? I actually have less time to think because it's less in my mind. And this, I think, combined with other external factors, like all the other stuff in my life that I'm thinking about, maybe a lack of motivation or just I need to pay the rent, right, dramatically reduces my ability to act. Okay, so if we zoom out, we see there's these two kind of self-reinforcing cycles, right? There's the one over there and going counterclockwise and the one over here going clockwise. Okay. On the left is the one that I would call our survival routine. Okay, it's the stuff that we do because we have to, but not necessarily because we care about it deeply. It's the stuff we don't care about, but that we have to get through, right? And on the right, we have the cycle of positive reinforcement, which is basically what psychologists, like Abraham Maslow, call self-actualization, or the ability to become what one is capable of becoming. Okay? So for those of you who aren't familiar with Maslow's needs hierarchy, I'm just going to recap it very briefly. Maslow was a psychologist who wrote an important book in the mid-20th century called Towards the Psychology of Being. And he was really what they called the third force in psychology, following behaviorism and psychoanalytics, which were introduced by Freud and then Freud's disciple Jung. And the big different thing about Maslow, which was cool, is that he was really interested in studying the health of humans instead of just the humans who had some kind of mental problem. So he spent a lot of time talking to people who were at the top of their career in a certain field. So he interviewed Einstein, right? And he interviewed all of the leading actors and playwrights, and tried to understand what it is that makes a very healthy mind, which I think is actually a kind of healthier way to think about psychology in a lot of ways. And he wanted to reinforce this with this idea of humanistic psychology. And one of his major findings was his idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So basically the work is at the bottom we have physiological needs, or these kind of natural drives that we need to survive, right? We need air, water, food, salt, sugar, and so forth. Okay? And then moving up the ladder we have defense needs, right? And a lack of defense makes us anxious or insecure. So we need safety and security and fairness, some routine. Okay? Then there's affection needs, like love or belongingness. Esteem needs, so I might have self-esteem issues with confidence or mastery or achievement, or esteem by others, right? I want recognition from my friends or my peers, or attention or appreciation or respect. And then at the top, he had this thing that he called self-actualization needs, like truth, goodness, beauty, curiosity, knowledge, understanding, justice, order. Okay? Now, the thing about Maslow's needs hierarchy is he basically made the claim that if you're at a lower state on this ladder, you're incapable of thinking about any of the stuff above it. So let's imagine that you're sitting in an opera and you're starving to death. Right? You won't be able to enjoy the music. That's basically what it comes down, right? You need to satisfy each of these needs to be able to get to this level of self-actualization. And he broke these into these two categories. Basically, there's the basic needs, or survival needs, and there's the growth needs, or these what he called being values, or meta needs. Right? These are needs about what we might do to self-actualize in the world. Okay, so when we look back at our system, we could sort of say, well, we could say that the basic needs are on the left, and that's what this survival routine is kind of dealing with. And the growth needs, or being values, are on the right, and that's all about self-actualization. And another way we could think about it is that the stuff on the right is the world of inner control, right? These are the things that I can do something directly about myself. And the stuff on the left are the world of external forces. These are things that are buffeting me as I go through my life. Because while on the right side, I'm actively in control of my own behavior, on the left, I'm really more susceptible to the influences of others. And if I don't do the things that I care about for myself, then the things I care about will be controlled entirely by somebody else. Okay. And the critical thing here is this central piece, which I put in the middle. And I'm calling it the balance of action. And we could kind of say the balance of action slides across that spectrum depending on how self-actualized we are. And the question is, how much are our actions, the things that we choose, influenced by survival routines, and how much are they influenced by the things we care about? And so my hypothesis would be that if we want to design a truly value-driven system, right, that actually, design makes the world better, it's critical that we're able to overcome this kind of rift between these two spaces, right? And I think doing so is going to require a lot of effort to get people out of the survival cycle so everyone can do the things that they actually value, okay? And in this regard, I think there's something kind of problematic with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that's that it's typically shown as a pyramid, right? You need to build the foundation level before you get higher up. And there's something kind of visually about that metaphor, which to me makes it look as if fewer people deserve to be on the top, or fewer people are capable of being at the top. And I don't believe that that's necessarily the case. I think we ought to be able, if we have a self-actualized kind of leadership or governance of the world, to be able to distribute the resources that we have to raise everybody up out of that bottom level to some degree. Right? There's nothing about the structuring of that governance that's implicit in the model. Okay. So one goal of value-driven design would be to get as many people self-actualized as possible. And the idea is that the more self-actualized we are, then the more capability we'll have to address the survival needs of everyone else. And here we have another really important challenge. Okay? The issue is, with self-actualization, just because I know a lot about something, and I care about it, and I do something about it, I'm still needing to make a value judgment about what to do, right? And this is the world of inner control, right? So there are principles and morals and judgments and all of these things that I do. So I might be self-actualized and a humanitarian, but frankly, I might also be a kind of self-actualized dictator or tyrant, right? And there's also the possibility that the collective actions of many self-actualized individuals, if everybody was in this state, still won't necessarily address the highest priority global needs simply because everyone is doing what they personally care about instead of what the world really needs in some kind of aggregate, holistic sense. So I think ultimately what's necessary are value judgments that prioritize global and social values over personal interests and passions. Self-actualization is kind of focused on the self, and we need to move beyond that or above that. Okay, so the challenge here is somehow to incentivize people to care deeply about global priorities. But I think this incentive needs to arise internally, right? And it's quite possible that people are self-interested and don't like doing things in the service of others, right? Or at least not as much as the things that they like doing for themselves, because they're more pleasurable. Especially in a society of collective deferral, right? If everybody else isn't doing it, why should I stick my neck out, right? Okay. So this could lead to a cycle we could call avoidance, right? Where people actively choose to do different things. So they might have learned enough about a given topic, frankly, that their interests move elsewhere. Right? I get kind of tired of it, I get bored, and move on to something else. I get disinterested. Okay. And, well, let's say I do that. Another issue could be people who care deeply about something, but because other people care less about it, or other people have given up, and nothing seems to be working, they become really frustrated and stuck in this cycle of trying to do things and everybody else isn't helping, right? And this could spiral into a sort of depression, right, that's really hard to get out of. Here the issue isn't so much that I don't care about the global priority, but more that I need to stop caring about it to escape from this unhealthy mental cycle, right? Because I'm just spinning my wheels and nothing is happening. Okay. And either of these cases would kind of drive us back to the left side, right? So our personal motivations aren't doing good enough, and this is the world of external forces on the left. Now in this world, we talked about how I might become ignorant about something because of high global priority, because of my lack of action, right? And ultimately, this diminishes my ability to act. And that's true. But there are also external forces here that may influence my actions, okay? So to take an extreme example, I could be fed some misinformation, and this sort of brainwashing could keep me from caring about things, right? Because society has imposed something which is intentionally trying to not make me do stuff that I value. But I think the really good news here is that we can also design external forces that help us realize our potential. And I think one of the particularly powerful external forces that we can look at is one that many designers know intuitively to be true. And this is what I would call the power of ignorance. Okay? Because really, ignorance is a sort of bliss, right? Because when an individual is aware of the fact that they need to learn more about something, even if they don't know what that is, they know that they don't know, right? And there are things that we can do externally to give them the knowledge they need, right? And I think the important thing here is that the individual learns to develop a set of values that's comfortable with ambiguity and mystery and a sense of possibility. You take a designer who has a certain bag of process knowledge, you throw them into a topic they know nothing about, and they're actually coming to it kind of fresh and are able to look at it fresh and develop a new way of thinking about that problem. Okay. And in my mind, this is really the role of education in society, or design education in particular. Right? It's to inspire curiosity about the world and the confidence to tackle these unknown challenges, whether in the arts or in the sciences. But I think it's especially true in design, because that's what designers do, right? We tackle unknown challenges. The nature of design is to create something new. And anything that's really truly creative or new as an action involves the generation of some kind of outcome that hasn't previously existed. And in that condition, really everyone will be ignorant about the potential implications because we're making up a new world. We're designing a future that nobody's lived in yet. There's a quote that I really like that says that training is a preparation for the future that's known. And education is a preparation for the future that's unknown, right? And I think almost everything about the technological future that we live in today is very unknown. And I think that if we can get people passionate enough about design education, say, and about educating others through design, then we'll have significantly more personal motivation and empowerment to do things better, and more people caring deeply not just about excellent design, but about the design that is driven by a strong set of values. Okay? So this kind of wraps all the way back around up to the top, and it makes me care more about something. Okay, and I actually believe if we design these systems of value-driven design education correctly, we can also help designers when they're faced with especially difficult value judgments. Okay? So here we are at the value judgment. And instead of being forced to choose between the personal priorities and the global priorities, which are really, frankly, a kind of artificial distinction anyway, if we decide that one of our values is collective action, right? We can reward whatever the community of designers considers to be collectively valuable behavior. And in this regard, we should be able, by designing the most innovative, high quality, and efficient systems, right, the outputs of our design, for value-driven design education, we ought to be able to reward that behavior in our newly defined and truly value-driven economy that we've just built, right? And it's value-driven not in the sense of economic values, but of human values, like truth and beauty, and human-centered design, which values things like critical thinking and integrity and diversity and practice-based learning. Okay, so of course this is not going to be easy, but I actually don't think it would be as hard as you might think, or at least not to identify a robust set of kind of educational principles for the design of, say, distributed or crowd-driven technology tools that enable collective altruistic action. The challenge, I think, is not how to design or build such a system, since really that's what good designers do, and it's what we're very good at in professional practice. And I think we see the increasing demand for quality design that's responsive to the emotional and intellectual needs of the people we're designing for, to help people to thrive and to learn. But that it would be difficult in the sense that our current systems of economics and governance are deeply entrenched. But I strongly believe that value-driven design could provide some kind of disruptive technology to these systems that really radically improve them. Think about how Twitter has changed politics to a certain degree, right? We've got the 24-hour news cycle, and people are much more responsive to rumors, right? And they're immediately debunked. So ultimately, the question is going to be about how to empower value-driven systems with the mandate to guide and to mentor and, frankly, to govern us. How do we give up our control to them so that they can shape the nature of our values and our passions for the collective good? Okay, so this is a system that I've outlined for value-driven action. And frankly, the only thing that an individual would need to do to participate in this system would be to value the system as an idea and to take the first step to begin to use it. And after that, the system would guide them through a network of mentorship that are scaffolded in some way to support students at each stage of their self-discovery process towards meaningful projects for social change that we all collectively care about. It's a new kind of value economy. OK, so here we are. And I think at this point, we have enough information to really concretely summarize this relationship between the critical sequence of passion to action to knowledge to priorities. And from what I've gathered through a lot of work that I've done since these initial value sorting exercises, we've interviewed over 14 socially motivated designers and design students and leaders in philanthropy and altruism who are all committed to positive social change. And we've synthesized that data and come up with some pretty robust design principles and guidelines for how we might go about building such a system. It's true that this relationship is kind of linear, but I think it involves much deeper iterative cycles of interplay between these various factors. Okay? So here we see how these factors are really related. First, we need tools to help us practice self-reflection on our experiences when learning and innovating. Okay? And this is critical because self-reflection is ultimately the origin of our values. It's where our values come from. We reflect on what we care about, and then we know. And we know that human values are essential for quality design judgments. And we can also say that valuing self-reflection through action is the best way to build transformative learning environments. And we know that awareness of our values is necessary for self-transformation because this kind of knowledge scaffolds the motivation that we need to act on our passions and perpetuate this virtuous cycle of reflective activity. Okay. Second, we found that social innovation can be structured by aligning our personal motivations and passions in a self-directed way with the shared visions and values of others. So in other words, allowing for self-direction provides the means for motivating engagement. And here I think there are many well-established tools that design educators can use, right? So we have peer mentorship, an emphasis on personal leadership and communication skills, and creating environments that make it safe to be risky, and frankly, that make it kind of risky to be safe, right? We're trying to put people in an uncomfortable place so that they explore a new set of directions for themselves. In short, I think to achieve social impact through value-driven design, we need to develop intuitive learning communities. And this requires flexible and kind of reflexive models of open learning and democratic education through hands-on, practice-based studio engagement like we have here. Third, we need tools that encourage social reflection, so moving out of the personal space into culture at large. Tools that mentor intuitive collective action and how to react quickly to changing design goals. And I think the opportunity here is to foster the evolving communication of teacher and learner relationships and the continuing kind of realignment of values between people as they interact for the benefit of everyone in that collaboration. So we could put it another way. We could say successful social innovation requires sustained and systemic openness to fringe ideas and differing personal values, because this is how social value is generated when people interact, through discourse and through disagreement. Mentoring is really critical to social reflection, because it's the bridge between what we could call kind of experience differentials between people, right? The knowledge that's shared when they interact and when people have different backgrounds and knowledge. And mentoring also builds on and challenges what we care about collectively. So social reflection is really kind of essential to value-driven design. Okay. And finally, I think value-driven societies will require tools that protect and advance these shared goals of the community in some way. So we could call these tools for leading and sustaining impactful altruism. And we know from other projects around participatory and organizational design that the most impactful social learning occurs when well-structured and kind of expressive communication networks can generate and sustain an honest enthusiasm and dialogue around the various team members' personal experiences and knowledge. So we need some kind of real-time leadership supporting tools that shape the context in which projects succeed by directing both the values and the effectiveness of the collaborators within them, and negotiating for impact while staying true to the altruistic vision that matters most at large. Okay, so this is the process that I've outlined for value-driven design. The reflection on and direction of our personal and global passions. So we can call them self-actualization, the process on the left, and social actualization, the process on the right. So I'd just like to conclude by reminding us that design is ultimately the manipulation of value. It's the way we reflect on and shape what we care about most deeply. And I think as a direct result of that, the world is how it is because of those values, because nearly everything is designed, and design is the way that value is delivered to a world that needs it. So the question of what kind of world we want to live in is really ultimately a question of what do we care about, and how can we design our compassion to grow? Will we take intentional control of our values by designing systems that enable us to shape our world? Or will we let the values of our world shape the things that matter most? Thank you very much.